VikesNow, January 24th. We are here with Josh Frey. He's the boss at Purple PTSD, and we have made a full pivot to the offseason over these last 2 weeks, keeping an eye on the conference championships that are upcoming. We'll get to some end of show predictions for those. But Josh, your NBA world was upended. We know you are a Bucks guy, and they have just said, you know what, we're all in with a guy who doesn't usually go all in. But other than that, how is your week going?
It's going all right. I mean, obviously, I wish I made a little bit better predictions for the divisional round last weekend. I think I only hit actually one of those four
Oh
games,
no.
but hopefully we'll do a little bit better this week. Other than that, I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, wonderful. That Chiefs Bills game was so damn entertaining. I just
Oh
had
yeah.
I had no clue it would end like a Vikings game. Did you feel that coming?
Kind of. I mean, Buffalo, Minnesota, they're basically the same franchise at this point. So, I mean, if it was gonna end that type of way, if it's gonna end in a heartbreaker for the Bills, that definitely seemed like the way it was gonna end. So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
I've been paranoid, a weird type of paranoia that I've looked ahead. I said, you know what if the Vikings get this quarterback decision right in the next year or two? What if we end up like the Bills, where you do have Drake May or you have Jaden Daniels? And is it any better to be where we're at right now, with a ceiling of 10-7, 11-6? And then lose, or is it any better to always lose to the Chiefs? It feels like, I mean, that's just a cynical Vikings fan brain talking, but it just seems like you feel so bad for the Bills because what are they going to do? They have to fire the
Yeah.
coach. That's like the only thing you could do to say, here's how we're going to get better.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one bright side for the Vikings in that spot is you don't have to play the Chiefs every year in order to get to the Super Bowl. I mean, the NFC, I mean, we saw last week. I mean, Green Bay hung toe to toe with the 49ers.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the NFC North's looking like a tough division next year, but I mean, at the very least, you don't have to go against like three of the top five quarterbacks just to make it to the Super Bowl. So maybe the Vikings could get lucky if they land it.
Yeah, we want to keep the pecking order of QB rankings and NFC. We want to keep that not like the AFC where it's like 8 guys that you have to fear.
Right.
All right, so I've asked you to come up with a list of 5 realistic free agents that the Vikings can sign. So we're talking about guys that could tangibly sign with the Vikings. But to set the table as a prediction for these purposes, I don't care what you want. As a prediction, do you think Kirk Cousins is back? Because that sets the tone for how much money will be available.
I do think he'll be back, just for a lot of the reasons that we discussed on previous shows, just
Mm-hmm.
keeping that continuity. They've kind of already got money on the books for him, so it feels more efficient to utilize that money this year rather than just lose almost $30 million for nothing. I know that'll eventually they'll have to pay some sort of dead money for him, but
Mm-hmm.
it probably won't be as large as this season's total. And I mean, Justin Jefferson, you plug in a competent quarterback in that offense, and I really do believe that the Vikings are right there in the mix in the NFC next year. So I do kind of think that Kirk is going to come back this
Okay.
offseason.
So with that said, let's assume that it's between 30 and 40 million dollars. They would have a diminished available cap space, although they probably will put some of it into next year or the year after, however Quasi wants to structure it. But why don't you start us off? Give me a first realistic free agent that could be signed by the Vikings on March 11th, 12th, or 13th.
Yeah, I'm first and foremost. I'm going to stick with the running back spot. I know that's then one of your desires for this offseason is to sort of fix the running game for next year. And I think if you want to find a cheap option in free agency right now, I feel like Zach Moss is that precise type of player. When Jonathan Taylor was going through his holdout at the beginning of the season and they needed a guy to fill in, Zach Moss did an absolutely fantastic job over those first 4 games. He had 89 carries, 445 rushing yards, and 3 rushing TDs, which is the same amount as Ty Chandler had for the entire season. And then Josh Dobbs also had 3 rushing touchdowns over the entire season. And in total, the Vikings only had 7 of those all year. So obviously, finding some sort of stability at that running back position needs to be some sort of a focus. Moss is still a relatively young guy, only 26 years old, and just turned that in December. And honestly, I'm a little bit surprised at how low some of the projections are for him in free
Mm-hmm.
agency, considering what he did with the Colts this season, almost 1,000 rushing yards and being being a really good back over those first 4 games without Taylor in the lineup. But Brad Spielberger of PFF is only projecting that he's going to get 2 years at 7.5 million. Spotrac's only at 2 years, right around 9 million for him. So it should be a relatively cheap deal for the Vikings if they want to go out and get him. And I think that the Vikings do need to bolster that running back room a little bit. And I feel like he'd be a really good option for it.
I agree with you that whether it's the draft, because you can get probably a top 3 guy if they keep their second round pick, running back that is, or through free agency, because there's just a litany of free agent running backs. Whether you want to go with like one final hurrah with Derrick Henry, I don't know if they'll spend on Josh Jacobs. That doesn't feel like a Kwesi thing. But the Vikings have a bunch of running backs under contract. It's just, how will it be different if you just, I mean, maybe if you say Ty Chandler is our bell cow, maybe that will be the trick. We would probably be really anxietal about that heading into week 1, just because, why did they figure this out last year? But let's face it, they have Alexander Madison. It doesn't make sense financially to cut him. Like, you gain nothing essentially by getting rid of him. So I expect him to be on the roster unless they want to eat, like, was it $4 million in dead cap? Ty Chandler for sure will be on the roster. Kane Nwangu will be a roster bubble guy, because do you really need a kick returner anymore? And then Dwayne McBride is the big question mark on the practice squad. Couldn't even get a sniff on a bad rushing team. Not good for his future. So Zach Moss kicks us off, a free agent. I challenge viewers to go pull up Spot Rack or anybody's free agent list of running backs. It's a who's who. There's going to be a lot to choose from, which I don't know if that probably drives the price down in an already bad running back market for their sake. So we start off with offense. Zach Moss, what do you got for number 2?
I'm going to stick with offense for the second one. And an area that I think the Vikings need to improve in is the wide receiver room. Obviously, Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, one of the best 1-2 punches in the league. But with Osborne and Brandon Powell both heading into free agency, they need to add a little bit of depth there. And I'd like to see them add a little bit more speed to that room as well, just to spread defenses, take a little bit more pressure off of the top 2 guys. And I think a guy capable of doing that is Noah Brown. He had a really fantastic season in Houston this year. I think he averaged, it was 17.2 yards per reception, 33 catches this year. So not a massive sample size, but for a slot guy, that's definitely enough to show that, yeah, he's capable of playing that type of role at the NFL level. And he had a great season with CJ Stroud there in Houston. Should be a cheaper guy as well, especially with a lot of those top wide receiver free agents probably garnering a lot of the money in that room. And I think Spotrac is projecting that he'll get a 3-year deal, right around 16.8 million total. So not anything more than 6 million a year for a wide receiver 3, especially if Osborne's going to garner some bigger money in the open market. I think that he'd be a really solid WR3 for the Vikings next year.
One thing I will lament about the 2023 Vikings season is we couldn't even figure out if Jalen Nailor was capable of playing WR3, because he was always concussed, it felt like, or maybe he just isn't. But this was the golden opportunity between Jefferson's injury, Osborne having the drops to, get Nailor showcase to figure out, all right, we probably know Osborne's not going to be back. Can this guy be the WR3? And we don't know. Maybe the Vikings internally know. And I'm going to guess the answer is no. But this was supposed to be a year where there was a lot of hype. K-Fan and stuff said, yeah, this guy's pretty badass, but that didn't happen. So you got Noah Brown. It's really cool how at this time last year, maybe last summer, we looked at the Texans wide receivers. We were like, ugh. Like, how is CJ Stroud going to succeed? And now we're like, God, these guys got all the firepower they need.
No, yeah, that's exactly where I was with the Texans. That's why I projected them to miss the playoffs with this year's, because I just didn't know who CJ Stroud was going to be throwing to other than Tank Dell. And I mean, he turned Nico Collins and Noah Brown into really capable wide receivers. And maybe that's just a testament to Stroud's talent. But I mean, you keep Kirk around, I think he'd be able to figure something out with Brown as well.
Yeah, and the Tank Dell mentioned, that was you feeling confident that he would be okay. The rest of us were like, yeah, who the hell is that? What about the other WR3? I think I had in a recent article, because he'll be cheap, is Rashid Shaheed from your former. Would that one work, or is he not really a WR3 caliber?
I think that's another really interesting fit, and I'd like that one a lot, because he did a ton for the Saints offense this year. Like they were drawing up like those wide receiver screens for him, and he'd just go get yards after the catch. And I think he did a lot in the return room as well over the past couple of years for them as well. So I think he'd be a very great fit in that offense. And if Brandon Powell were a guy to leave, then you could just plug him in as the punt returner as well. So knocking out 2 birds with 1 stone with that.
Yeah, that's where I settled. It was my off-season plan that I published last Saturday, and I don't think that I know that they don't need to break the bank on a WR3 because you have Powell who can fringe be that in a pinch, but Shaheed always from a fantasy standpoint, when you're in deep in the heart of bye weeks and you're in a deep league, you're like, I could play this guy. So that one piqued my interest. So we got Noah Brown, Rashid Shaheed for WR3. What's next on the list? Your number three realistic free agent for these Vikings.
Number three, I'm going to go with a little bit of a riskier one, I think. AJ Epineza out of Buffalo.
Sweet.
Honestly, we talked about a couple guys that have kind of been in the Harrison Phillips role when
Yeah.
he was in Buffalo, and I think Epineza is another one of those
hmm
guys where he's only started 4 games over his first few years in the NFL, but whenever he's on the field, it seems like he's able to generate pressure against opposing quarterbacks. And the Vikings took a chance with Marcus Davenport last year, but ultimately the injuries got the better of him. And I think if they want to go in a little bit of a similar route with a 1 year type of prove it deal for a guy, I think Epineza is a really solid option. He's had 6.5 sacks in each of the last 2 years while playing basically under 40% of the defensive snaps in all of his seasons so far in the NFL. So I think you plug him in with that defense opposite Danielle Hunter, assuming that they could find a way to bring him back as well, which is
hmm
obviously a question mark. But those two guys coming off the edge, I think that would be a really solid fit in the Vikings defensive front.
I think that is a very smart choice because I believe that Kwesi will look for those guys that are on that, hey, he played 40% of snaps this year, and then, his PFF grade was 74. The Harrison Phillips running joke that we have. And with the Bills, there's probably going to be a lot of guys you can pluck from that roster because all of those big contracts now windfall. Somehow Josh Allen was, Josh Allen was extended 3 years ago. Somehow the big money is just kicking in now. This year his cap number was 18 million. Next year I think it's 47 million. And the same with Diggs. His cap number this year, if we're still in this season, was 14 something. Now it jumps to 27 million. Conveniently matched up with his age-related decline, it appears, or maybe he played hurt. I don't know. The moral of the story is that the Bills, their championship window hasn't closed, but now they have to get creative. They are encountering what the Chiefs encountered 2 years ago. How do we pay this QB1 and WR1 and still outfit a really good depth chart? Those chickens have come home to roost for the Bills. So if you're looking at free agents, you're probably going to see a lot of Bills ones that become available. Am I wrong?
I would 100% agree with that. I mean, like you said, the Bills are up there with the Saints in terms of cap hell heading into free
Yep.
agency. So it seems like they're probably gonna have to part ways with a couple of these guys this offseason.
Yep. And then like the Chiefs, they're gonna have to hope they nail the draft. Otherwise, I did some homework on it. If they trade Diggs after June 1st, they can alleviate a lot of the dead cap. It's still not all of it, and they're gonna have to absorb. And I don't even know if they want to trade Diggs. I just assume that he's gonna, have a big fuss about something here in the next 5 months, and then those talks will ratchet up. So keep an eye on the Bills, and if they have these juicy free agents that they can't afford, they could become Minnesota Vikings. Zach Moss, Noah Brown, AJ Espinosa. Who's number four?
Number four, I'm sticking with Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
For like we just talked about, I think a lot of these guys are going to be available. And Tyrell Dodson, their linebacker that really stepped up over the second half of the season. He's a free agent this year. Didn't really get a ton of playing time up until the closing stretch of this year, just because a lot of those injuries. But when he did come into the lineup, he played really damn well for him. He was PFF's second highest graded linebacker over the course of the season at 90.2, and he was only behind Fred Warner of the San Francisco 49ers. And I mean, it feels like he could be another guy that would be relatively cheap this offseason just because he's proved it for 8 games. Can he prove it for a full 17 though? So, and with a lot of those talented players at the linebacker position, seems like that market could be going a lot of the money will go towards the top of that list. But I mean, Dodson basically did everything for the Bills over the closing stretch of the year, and he was a big reason why the defense was able to find success and ultimately make that playoff run. So, especially if Jordan Hicks goes elsewhere this upcoming free agency, you need a guy in there alongside Ivan Pace that can kind of do it all in that defense, and I think Dodson's a really nice fit for that.
If you look at the four remaining teams, and especially the two that will probably go to the Super Bowl in the Ravens and the 49ers, they have not skimped at off-ball linebacker. In fact, they have glorious off-ball linebackers. And there's a temptation, by me included, that when you get to free agency, you can go get an off-ball linebacker for $2 or $3 million. Just get a guy who can tackle. And the 49ers and Ravens, assuming they get to the Super Bowl, it's a big assumption. They emphasize that these we're going to spend here and we're going to get, the best of the best. And along with, as a side note, tight end. Every single team that's remaining has a very productive. I think every single guy has been to a Pro Bowl, if you assume Mark Andrews will play this weekend. So thankfully, the Vikings have that all figured out. And, Hawkinson, God willing, will be back before too long. So what's your long-term prognosis while we are on the topic on Brian Asamoah? Is he going to get snaps, or do we think that would have happened this year and therefore he's just a reservist guy from here on out?
I kind of have some renewed optimism after the report from Darren Wolfson and him announcing that he had that shoulder surgery last week. And it seems like that was an injury that plagued him out throughout the entire season. And considering that he was PFF's #1 rookie linebacker over the course of the 2022 season, it feels really weird that he'd all of a sudden just fall off a cliff. Yeah. I know he didn't get a ton of defensive snaps during that rookie season, but he played a lot down the stretch of the year. He had that key forced fumble against the New York Giants in that division clinching game. So I think that he's in line to get more snaps next year as long as he's healthy, but that's the big question. Is he able to stay healthy?
Yeah, and it was telling to me, and hopefully the injury surgery explained it, that when Hicks went down, Troy Dye snaps went up. And I'm like, what are we doing here? We saw Asamoah was, a supreme playmaker in the regular season Giants game in 2022. So it would make sense if he was hampered by the injury and they were taking it cautiously or judiciously. That will be one of the talkers, and we'll probably know about it early on in free agency if they sign, Dotson or somebody, and you're like, boom, Pace and Dotson, or they're just bringing Hicks back. That would work too. But Asamoah will be one of the fascinating ones because of how good he looked as a rookie. All right, Zach Moss, Noah Brown, AJ Espinosa, Dotson from the Bills. Who's the last one on the list?
Last one, I'm going to go with a little bit of a sneaky need. The offensive line. The Vikings have a ton of their depth guys going into the free agency this year, and I think it's 8 of them actually on their offensive line. And one of those is starter Dalton Reisner, who played the final stretch of the year at that left guard spot. And I'm looking at Kevin Zeitler out of Baltimore. He's been one of the most consistent guards in the entire league over his 12-year career, and I know age is starting to catch up with him. I think he turns 34 this season.
That's fine for a guard.
Yeah, no, that I mean, he's definitely still got at least a couple of years left in him, and he's been absolutely fantastic throughout his entire career. I think he was PFF's 15th graded guard over the course of the 2023 season. Obviously, there's the caveat that he typically has played at the right guard spot, but if you look at Ed Ingram, he played left guard basically throughout his entire college career. So I feel like that would be an opportunity to maybe flip him over to that side of the ball. Maybe he plays a little bit better at that left guard spot rather than the right guard spot, and you plug Zeitler into that right guard. And he's been an absolutely fantastic pass protector, decent run blocker as well. So kind of does it all. And if the Vikings can find a way to get him, I think that he'd be a really great fit in that offensive line. Would probably be a little bit more expensive than some of these other guys just because he's a proven commodity at the NFL level. But with the age starting to catch up, maybe you can get him a little bit cheaper still.
And this is in Reisner's spot or Ingram's spot?
This would be if Reisner were to go elsewhere, okay. But I think they'd probably keep Zeitler at that right guard spot since that's where he's played and been successful, and then probably swap Ingram over to that left guard.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been able to get a read on Reisner's thank you tweets to Skull Nation.
Yeah.
Because it sounded throughout the season that he absolutely wanted to stay here, and he probably does. But on the tweets, it's almost he's like saying thanks for everything, and you're like, well, wait a second, you're coming back, right? So I haven't figured out if he will, because I think there was a PFF, there was somebody that said like he's gonna want 6-7 million per year.
Yeah, that was PFF. They projected him at 3-year, $24 million, and if that's the case, maybe the Vikings aren't going to be able to retain him just because he's going to cost so much. And then if that does happen, then I think they're projecting Zeitler at a 2-year, $15 million deal. So that'd be cheaper than Reisner to begin with. So, and he's a better player.
Yeah, I think what perhaps the problem, and we'll learn this in March, is if indeed Reisner goes out on the open market and gets that deal, we were mistaken in thinking, well, it took so long to get him in the regular season. Nobody wanted him. We got him for cheap, and therefore he'll stay with us for cheap. Perhaps that logic wasn't correct. All right, I'm going to throw a curveball at you as we get off the show here. My bold offseason prediction for the Vikings is that they indeed trade some semblance of the farm up to get a quarterback, whether it's Jaden Daniels or Drake May. The reason I'm leaning this way for my bold prediction is every mock draft that you see that's worth its salt has the Bears, the Commanders, and the Patriots going boom, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. And it's almost like, every summer we're looking at Super Bowl predictions and then people are like, hey, it's going to be the Chiefs and the Eagles again. And that never happens. It's never the two teams you think are best. So I really don't believe it's going to be bang, bang, bang quarterback to all three of those teams. I think a team like the Commanders or the Patriots are going to realize, you know what? Why don't we trade this pick to the Vikings? We'll get 2 firsts and 2 seconds. We can team build, and then we'll sign Cousins or somebody. I think that one of those teams is going to realize that they're too far off to drop Drake May into a shitty team. That's my personal theory, and then the Vikings could pounce. So my bold offseason prediction is the Vikings indeed make a big trade up the board to get their guy. Do you have a bold offseason prediction you'll reveal on air?
Oh man, this is tough on the spot. I will say, I mean, I do think that they're going to keep Kirk around. But I'm kind of right there with you. I think they're going to trade up and draft a quarterback too. It kind of just feels like this is the time for them to pounce on that opportunity with all this quarterback talent in the draft. I keep on holding out hope for Jaden Daniels. But I do think that those quarterbacks could go 1, 2, 3, but the bold prediction that for me would be they land Jaden Daniels, but it's a product of the Patriots trading up to that number 1 spot to take a quarterback that they want and draft Caleb Williams or Drake May, whichever one that they see fit. And then hopefully the Bears decide that they want to keep Justin Fields around. Kind of seems to be trending that direction with their OC hire this week. So maybe they drove Marvin Harrison and then the Vikings swoop up to 4 or 5, whatever it is, and they draft Daniels.
If you were the Vikings general manager, head coach, or just who you are in terms of wanting the team to succeed, would you rather have Jaden Daniels or Drake May with that King's ransom trade?
I think I'd rather have Jaden Daniels, if I'm being completely honest. I just think that his ceiling is just completely off the charts. I really do feel like he has potential to be one of the best quarterbacks in the entire league, which is it's very, very bold to say considering the quarterback talent in the NFL right now. But I just think with that rushing ability, with his ability to make the deep throws as well, just do basically everything that you want out of a quarterback prospect, I think I'd rather have Daniels at this point.
Another, not even footnote, but a caveat of the theory the Vikings draft and Jaden Daniels is I'm pretty damn sure that would appease Justin Jefferson.
Yeah,
coming from LSU. I think, we started back in 2020 and 2021 with the narrative that Jefferson didn't like Kirk. We said at the time that was bullshit. And turns out it was. He loves Kirk. And if now we're at the same folks that said he doesn't like him, they're like, well, he's going to leave because he loves Kirk if they get rid of Kirk. So I think the way you could blend it is to say, well, we have to pay you, first of all, Justin. And so we can't really pay Kirk for the rest of our lives. Therefore, we're going to draft our finest Jaden Daniels, who you probably know. I think that would suffice.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of bodes to your point earlier with the Bills. Like the Vikings, if they want to make this run, there's probably a chance that they're not going to be able to pay both Jefferson and a franchise quarterback. So if they want to try to marry those two with Jefferson getting big money and then they go find one of these rookie quarterbacks, this is the perfect time to do it.
Yeah, and it really aligns perfectly because Justin Jefferson's mega bucks will, funnel into his bank account in his absolute prime. And by the time the theoretical second extension came time, the bill would be due. He's going to be about 30, 31. And then we'll figure out, what type of receiver is he at this point? Do we keep him or do we sign Addison instead? The possibilities are limitless. All right, heading off air. I have the Lions losing by about 10 to the 49ers. I think their luck runs out. And then, man, this one, I hate picking against Mahomes, but I have to stick with my preseason pick. I have the Ravens by a total whisker, probably a field goal, only because they're at home. If this game was in Kansas City, I would pick the Chiefs. Who do you got for the Super Bowl matchup?
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you in terms of Ravens Chiefs. If this game was at Arrowhead, there's no way I'm betting against Mahomes in this spot, but that Baltimore defense has been absolutely fantastic. Lamar Jackson is playing some of the best football of his entire career. And if they can it seems like they're getting stuff out of Dalvin Cook too, which is just a bolster to their running back room. And if all those three things are working together, I think the Ravens are going to be able to pull this one out this weekend. For the NFC side, I picked against the Lions in each of the first two rounds. I don't think I can do it.
Oh
I think
no.
I'm picking the Lions this week. I don't trust the 49ers
Heresy.
pass rush, and I foolishly thought going into these playoffs that the 49ers would be able to turn this defensive thing around, and it just didn't look like that against the Packers last week. Their front four and the pass rush just hasn't looked the greatest in the playoffs, and with Detroit's offensive line, I'm not convinced that the 49ers are going to be able to put a ton of pressure on Jared Goff, and with the rushing attack of Detroit as well. Like it would really suck for the Lions to make a Super Bowl before the Vikings do in the 20th century, or the 21st century. But I think the Lions are going to pull this one out this weekend and make it all the way to the Super Bowl.
Oh man. Well, that would make sense because I don't know how this flew under the radar in the aftermath of the 49ers win, but Brock Purdy looked like absolute shit for about 2 hours. Like Yannick was still here in South Dakota with me. Yannick Eckhart from Germany, who writes for Vikings territory, and I kept looking over him like, do they need to put in Sam Darnold, a guy who can complete a pass? Because he went through a stretch there where it just looked like, some practice squad guy. And so if that happens again, you better believe the Lions will pounce. On the Ravens side of it, I can't remember if I told you this ad nauseum, but when the Bucks won their championship, presumably one of the best summers of your life, I was telling anybody who would listen, I was like, Giannis has to get at least one. And this feels like the postseason to do it. That's where I'm at with Lamar Jackson. He's probably got to get at least one. And I feel it will be this time. And it just feels like that's the way it's shaping up. And I agree with you that the Baltimore defense kind of flew under the radar a little bit because everybody was hot on the Browns defense, but the Ravens defense has really matured into a 1B, if you want to call the Browns 1A.
Yeah, no, completely agree there. Yeah, it's going to be a fun weekend regardless. So looking forward to these two games.
Yep, and that'll be this Sunday, and we will be back, kind sir, on Wednesday to prepare for that Super Bowl matchup. We'll have about a week and a half to do that at that point. And then whatever Vikings development we may have, what do you think will get the Cousins verdict? Do you think that'll be in February or early March?
I think it'll be March. I
Okay.
think they're taking their time with this thing, kind of waiting for some of the other pieces to unfold. Maybe if Bill Belichick takes his Atlanta job, that completely changes everything for Kirk too, because he definitely talked about how he would like to play for Bill Belichick. He wouldn't turn down an opportunity to play for the greatest head coach in NFL history. And it'd be kind of interesting to see Kirk Cousins be the guy that saves Belichick's legacy post Tom Brady, after some of the struggles in New England. And then he goes to Atlanta, brings Kirk along with him, and they go, who knows, maybe they win the NFC South, make a Super Bowl, something like that. It'd be really funny if that happened.
Yeah, ESPN predicted that this morning about the quarterback carousel. Russell Wilson, those guys, they predicted, Jeremy Fowler, that Cousins will join the Falcons and they will win the NFC South. So, strange times. All right, man, we'll talk to you in 1 week. All right.
Sounds good, man. See you then.
Yep. Later.